Hello, I'm Jeff Olson, Public Safety Director for the City of Cedar Falls. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about what's occurring in public safety, and specifically talking a little bit about calls for service, some of the different police and fire models that exist out in the United States today, and about what's happening here in our own department and some of the changes that we're making. And then talk a little bit about the budget, and I want to introduce you to the new public safety building, which is moving right along. So first I want to start out with talking a little bit about calls for service within the city of Cedar Falls. So typically the police respond to about 17,000 calls a year. It's about 46 per day. 2,100 of those are reportable crimes of all crime types, and I put that all crimes type in there for a specific reason, and I'll explain a little bit later when we're comparing FBI stats to Cedar Falls crime stats. And then we average about 950 arrests per year on the police side of things. Now on the fire side of things, we have about 1,800 calls per year, about 5 per day. About 1,000 of those calls are assisting medical calls. Now our primary medical services provided by Mercy One out of Sartori, and they are the paramedic level ambulance service that we as a city uses. Police and fire assist in many of those medical calls. And then fire has about 630 calls that they call good intent, canceled, maybe are weather related, that are frequently calls that you go to and they don't end up being what you think they are. For example, you can get called to a house fire, somebody's driving down the road, they see smoke, you go to the backyard and you see they got a bonfire going, something of that sort. And then fortunately, we are fortunate enough in the city of Cedar Falls that we only have about 6 serious structure fires a year. And you'll see when I start looking a little bit at crime stats, as well as the fire stats, that we're fortunate to have a low incidence compared to other cities. So the next slide I want to go to is the FBI crime stats. Now you'll look at that center column and it says violent crime. And you'll see on the left side we're comparing us to the United States averages, the Midwest average, Iowa, and then Cedar Falls. And it's real interesting as you look at that violent crime. You're going from 397 down to 378 in the Midwest, 290 in Iowa, and then 66 in Cedar Falls. So you can clearly see that violent crime in Cedar Falls is considerably less than the national average per 100,000 population. Then property crimes on the right, you see the same thing, 2,400 down to 2,200 down to 2,000, and then when you get to Cedar Falls, you're at 700. Now, if you just remember the slide before, I indicated that there's 2,100 crimes, total crimes. And you look at these FBI stats and you'll do the math here, and well, that's only 774. The reason for that is when the FBI has got to make comparisons between every city and every state to put comparisons together. So they only take certain crime elements. So they only take ones that they can compare from state to state and city to city. For example, a felony theft in Iowa maybe 5,000, in another state it's 10,000 or 2,000, and so they have to be able to make comparisons in order to give you fair, accurate representation between city and city. So they only take a certain number of crimes out of both the violent and property crimes. But again, the point we're trying to make here is that Cedar Falls has a real low crime rate compared to other cities, as well as fire loss. So this particular pie chart we actually create monthly with our monthly experience with our police and fire calls, and it's actually on our city website. So if you look at that chart, on the left side, the lighter blue, first of all, blue is police, and the red are typically fire calls. Now there are some of these calls where both police and fire go to. But if you look at the larger slice of the pie, on the left side, the lighter blue, you can read there where it's non-reportable type crimes, and that's 60% of what the public safety department responds to. Then a little to the right, the next largest piece of the pie is 21% of the incidents that we respond to. That's traffic accidents and traffic stops, traffic-related incidents. Then the next one is reportable crime, and that's what we talked about, the 2,100 crimes. And that's about 9% of all what the public safety department does is respond to specific crimes. And then you have your medical response in the darker red towards the top. That's 6% of all the calls of public safety department. And most of these are fire response. Police do go to some medical calls. So what the police and fire do is they assist the paramedics. On the more serious calls, you have both police, fire, and paramedics respond to. And on the least serious calls, you may just have the paramedics respond to. So we have a matrix that we put together that tells the dispatch center who to send. So if you enter in a real serious call, let's say chest pains, you're going to get a police officer, a fire truck, and the paramedics because we know that's a serious call. And we do that for multiple reasons. AED, the automatic defibrillators, are carried in the squad cars and the fire trucks, and of course the paramedics have those. So the first arriving might be able to, will use that device if necessary. And you know, your police are out and about all the time, and so typically the response from police is first. If it is a real serious call, a police officer or firefighter may also drive the ambulance to the hospital while both paramedics can work on the patient. So there's a lot of thought process that goes behind all of our calls, but that helps explain a little bit of what occurs on the medical front when it comes to the medical calls. And then you can look at the other two calls, and you can see what the calls that we talked about earlier. The canceled calls, the false alarms, and the good attempt. Both police and fire have a tremendous amount of alarm calls. It's a daily event, and you know 99.9% of them, fortunately, are false alarms, and so that's certainly a good thing. And then our actual fire calls, and some of them are weather hazard related, is less than 1%. So that's actually, again, I'm going to probably say this several times during this presentation, but we're fortunate to have those lower numbers. So now let's just talk briefly about the different policing models that exist out there today. So what I got on the screen here is it says police model. So you have full-time, part-time, reserves, and PSOs, which is public safety officer. So full-time is pretty self-explanatory as a full-time police officer. Part-time would be a part-time police officer. Now, state law regulates the type of training and certifications that are needed in police and fire, and whether it be reserve officer, full-time police officer, or firefighter. So the full-time police officer and the part-time police officer both need the ILEA police officer certification, which is a 16-week program that they have to attend at the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy. So that's full-time and part-time. So what you'll see with most police departments is there's very few part-time employees. The reason for that is you have to send them to the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy. Majority of them are looking for full-time work, so they're just going to leave your department as soon as they get through the academy and you get some training or some experience. They'll leave for a full-time job. So that hasn't proven to be very successful. Reserve officers is a volunteer who you cannot pay like you do a full-time or part-time. You can't pay them hourly. You can give them an annual stipend, say $1,000 a year, and you require them to do 20 hours a month, something of that sort. Now their training is to a police reserve level training, which is governed by the state of Iowa. That training is about 6 modules, and they're typically about 18 hours of training each, in which they maybe can do in a weekend, maybe at like Hawkeye Community College, or we have certified instructors with our own police division that can do that training. But that's, again, that's a different training standard level. Now we have several reserves in Cedar Falls, and they're very, very beneficial to us. Particularly on the police side, you can predict kind of when you're going to be busy. Weekend nights, and then during the summertime we use the reserves a lot because we have over 50 special events typically during summer weekends, special events in which we need some extra officer presence. So they're very helpful in that regard too. Then we have our public safety officer, which is a cross-trained police officer and firefighter. That's what the definition is for Cedar Falls, and I'll cover some other definitions that other cities may have when it comes to a public safety officer. Now I'm going to jump into the fire models a bit. So you have your full-time firefighters, your part-time firefighters, and your volunteer firefighter staff. What the state requires for training for a firefighter is if you're going to fight a structure fire, you need to attend the Firefighter 1 classes, which are typically 3-4 weeks of classes. Now, you don't have to be certified, so there is a test for a certification process. It's a written test, and then it's a skills test. You're not required to do that by the state of Iowa. Now, in the city of Cedar Falls, we do require for a full-time, a part-time, or a volunteer, or any type of firefighter position in the city of Cedar Falls, that you be certified in that Firefighter 1 classification. Now we also have our paid on call, and in the city of Cedar Falls, a paid on call is an individual that is a city employee elsewhere, but has been cross-trained to help either police or fire. So for example, you have public works employees or IT employee or others that are cross-trained as a police officer and help in a reserve capacity. You also have a few that are cross-trained as a firefighter that help in a firefighter capacity as well. Then we also have our public safety officers, which again is the cross-trained police officer and firefighter. Is the number one priority for us is to make sure we're getting that job done, making sure we're getting that police job done and that fire job handled, no matter what the type of incident. There's no compromises here. That's the number one priority. And then secondly, we're examining the most efficient ways to do that. But fire calls have been down 60% in the last 40 years. As you saw, our crime stats were very low crime compared to other cities. And I am openly will tell people that there's a lot of downtime in public safety. You have a lot of downtime on the fire side, and you have a lot of downtime on the police side. And so we're looking at these different models, figuring out how can we capitalize on that downtime and provide more police response and fire response without adding a bunch of full-time staff, and keep our budget in check. So a couple of cities that we visited or we called or did research in one way or another, because there are lots and lots of cities, over 100 cities out there that we know of that do something much different than the traditional police and fire role, which is we had done for years. Bloomington, Minnesota. Many of you know Mall of America. When you think of Mall of America, that's the city of Bloomington, Minnesota. Population 85,000. This was probably almost 2 years ago now when we did some research on that city. They only had 3 firefighters in their entire city, and that is a Minneapolis suburb with a significant population. They had heavy paid-on-call fire presence. So a majority of their fire staff, all but 3, was provided from a paid-on-call status. Their definition of paid-on-call is slightly different than ours. Theirs it's kind of like a part-time firefighter. You're paid to come to training, you're paid to respond to fire calls, and many of them are paid to sleep in the firehouse at night, so there's immediate response at night from the fire. So they had a different role. Another, it was a St. Paul suburb that we visited, approximately 70,000 population, was a public safety similar model. You were either cross-trained as a firefighter or you were cross-trained as a paramedic. So they'd hire an individual that'd be a police officer paramedic or a police officer firefighter. So you would serve one of those 2 roles when you were hired, and they were used to assist one side or the other. They staffed minimally on the fire side and supplemented them heavily with the public safety officer, which was a cross-trained police officer responding to the fire calls. We visited another city in Michigan, was fully cross-trained, 100% public safety officers. In other words, every public safety employee is cross-trained as a firefighter or police officer. So we ran into all sorts of different scenarios in different cities. There's a city in California that's been doing this since the 80s as well. And then some of the Des Moines suburbs do what's called an auto aid. So you have some of the Des Moines suburbs, which are mid-sized communities that would staff their fire department, what you might say minimally. And when they had a fire structure type call, they would automatically dispatch the fire departments from multiple cities to that fire structure. They're able to keep their costs down by keeping their personnel numbers down, handle their routine calls daily, weekly, without needing any assistance. But when they needed it, these cities all touch each other. They're all neighboring communities. They're all responding together to those fire calls. Very, very efficient use of people and good numbers responding. So as we examined all these different models, we started getting a better idea for what might work here. So just a little history with Cedar Falls Public Safety. So we've had public safety director since the 1980s, but we had the traditional police and traditional fire department, but we had a public safety director oversee both departments. Then we hit about 2005 and we started cross-training. So you could be a police officer or firefighter and cross-train to the other side. Now what we did at that time primarily was you'd have some police officers which would cross-train to be firefighters, and they would go down to the firehouse and spend so many hours a month in the firehouse. And I initially did that in 2005. So I would perform my police duties, and then I would go to the firehouse a few evenings a month and be available for calls. Now, you know, at the time, it just seemed like an idea, maybe a way to supplement fire a little bit, but it really wasn't that useful, because you would sit at the firehouse and wait for the call, and the call wouldn't come, and then you wouldn't be there, then the call would come, and it didn't make a lot of sense. And so we kind of modified that a little bit, where you would still do some time at the firehouse, you would still do your training, but then you would go respond to calls when you're off duty. So as we visited these other cities and we looked at a better model, you know, we found a much better model, and that better model was a public safety officer carrying their fire gear in their police car and responding to that fire scene immediately when the fire occurred. What we have here in Cedar Falls now is we have a police officer that is cross-trained as a firefighter. They carry their fire gear in their car and they respond to those fire calls immediately from their police car. They frequently get there before the fire trucks, and there's a lot they can do. Then notify the arriving firefighters where the fire hydrant is. Check to see that, first of all, that we have an actual fire, and report how big or how small or whatever type of fire scenario we have going on. See that the house is evacuated. See if there's any exposures nearby. Just all sorts of things they can do in those first few minutes. And they carry their gear in their car. They can be dressed and they can be ready when fire trucks get there, or they can do those other things and dress when the fire trucks get there, help hook up to the hydrant immediately, whatever the case is. And again, as we covered this earlier though, all these people are state certified to the Firefighter 1 level. And that includes going to the Firefighter 1 class, taking the written tests and passing the written tests, and then passing the skills test, which the state requires, in which they administer that test, and completing the 44-page skills manual that we have here in Cedar Falls and at our fire department that all the firefighters need to go through. They're checked off and trained by our full-time firefighters. This model increases the number of police officers and firefighters. So what you have is you have a group of police officers and you have a group of firefighters that are initially solely trained to those positions. You take some of those fire positions, either in a volunteer basis or as they attrit or retire, and you move a few of those positions over to the police side. So you have a few more police officers working patrol. So we've increased the number of police officers working. Now, as I sit right now, you're gonna say, we have a few less firefighters. But we cross-train all of those that move to the police side, and we cross-train considerably more police officers. So you still have your fire crew, and you have your police officers on the scene, or on patrol, but you actually have more, because you put more on the police side. When you have a fire call, your fire truck goes, and your police officers go to the fire scene. So you have those police officers adding to the firefighters that are already at the scene. And so what you end up having is you having an increased number of police officers on the street responding to police calls. And then when you have those structure fires, typically it's a structure fire, but there are other types of calls they go to. And again, we only have about 6 structure fires a year, serious structure fires here in Cedar Falls in a year. But that is the big advantage of this model. Now you have more police and you have more fire immediately on the scene. And also when you have callbacks. Firefighters have responded, and you got these police officers that are working at the time responding in their fire capacity with their fire gear. We do what's called a callback. And that is done through actually your cell phone, where we have a program called I Am Responding. And we send out the call for more people. We have more people come in. We've also experienced more people coming in for those fire calls because we have many, many more that are cross-trained. So initially we had 40 police officers on our shifts. And then we added more police officers, so you can clearly see we have more on the police side. 39 of our police officers are either currently cross-trained or they're in the process of cross-training. We also have 10 police officers that said they are not interested in cross-training, which is absolutely fine. You know, we have many that are hired that are volunteer, but the new hires do have to be cross-trained in both. And then you'll note I have 11 POCs and reserves. Now those are not part of that 49 number that you see at the top, but those are the ones that we talked about that additionally can help on police type calls. Now we got the fire side. Traditionally in the past we've had anywhere from 30 to a few more on the fire shifts. We now have 58 individuals within our public safety department that can respond and assist at fires, or I should say will have 58 because some are still in the training process. So 19 of those are the full-time firefighters, 39 of the public safety officers. And then we have the 3 part-time or POCs that assist fire as well. But the point I want to make to you here is we have 49 police officers now instead of 40. We have 58 firefighters instead of 30. So we're able to respond to police calls with more police officers immediately. Fire calls to fire scenes, more than we've had in the past, immediately. And more upon the callback, so when we're needed to call them back. Again, I think I maybe covered some of this in 2018. The personnel response increased to police and fire calls. We had over 11,000 hours of training on the police side, 8,000 hours of training on the police side. Fire calls, again, are down 60% in the last 40 years. So here's just a couple, and I put this together actually quite a few months ago, of some of the responses that we've had from the public safety officers. So on June 11th, we had a residential fire. We had 5 public safety officers that responded immediately and arrived before the fire trucks to a fire call. August 6th, we had a report of a house fire, and it turned out not to be a house fire. It was one of those fires or calls where you go to, it's reported a house fire. Turns out not to be that at all. We had 9 public safety officers working that assisted those fire shifts, and many of them, some of them arrived before the fire trucks. Same date, actually, we had another call. It was an ice machine that was reported on fire and smoking. 8 PSOs responded immediately, most of them arriving before the fire trucks. Now, all they had to do was unplug the machine and it took care of the problem. But those are significant number of more firefighters that we're having at these scenes than we have in the past. September 10th, we had a recovery that we had to do. We had 10 public safety officers respond immediately, some arriving before the fire trucks. October 1, we had a house struck by lightning. I remember this was 4 o'clock in the morning. We had 4 PSOs respond immediately, and they were all there before the fire trucks arrived. They're there with their gear. They can gear up. They can be ready to go right away the same time the fire trucks are. So we have some significant successes with increased number of people responding to the fire scene immediately. And of course, if we need to do a callback, we do the callback, and we get many, many more responding to help us. The reason we're doing this, I covered a little bit earlier, but I just want to say again, is we're increasing our number of people responding. We're keeping the same number of staff, so our costs are very, very similar. This will slow down, in the future. As a public safety director, I can see as the city grows and as we monitor our numbers, I could see as the city grows going to the mayor and council saying, hey, we need a couple more police officers, we need a couple more firefighters, but I'm not going to have to do that for a significant amount of time because we've already done that and we're keeping the same number of people we have. So it's a very efficient model. But again, I want to say, as I said earlier, the number one thing that we need to make sure we do is we get the job done. And efficiency is important as well, but we need to make sure we're getting the job done. So what we're trying to avoid here is I want to show you this that I just talked about briefly. Peoria, Illinois. This was a 2018 article. Peoria City Council debating cuts to the fire department. They're cutting 22 fire positions and taking $1.1 million out of the police budget. We don't want that to happen here. Here's another one. Tucson, Arizona. Tucson fire chief is proposing $4.7 million of cuts. And I know that's a much larger department than we have, but that's a significant cut occurring to that department. Here's another one. 22 firefighters are quitting in South Tucson, Arizona, amid personnel cuts. They know there's going to be a lot of cuts. And so you've got cities out there that are having all sorts of budget issues, and they got to figure out ways to do it. And your public safety budget takes up, in many cities, it's 80 to 85% of their general fund. Us, it's not that much. But for a lot of them, it's when cuts have to come, they have to cut from public safety, because if 80% of your general fund is going to public safety, it doesn't give you much area to cut. So you really need to think about, we as public safety managers need to think about that. So now I want to hit you a little bit on property tax rates. This is just something I like to share because I don't think a lot of people know this out there. So property tax comparisons, we got the top 20 cities on the chart here. We are the 5th lowest tax rate out of all those 20 cities, which is something significant, I think, and talks a lot about the entire city and how the city manages. Debt comparison, top 20 cities again. Cedar Falls is the absolute lowest, which goes to explain a little bit why our taxes are lower than most in the state. Public safety building, we broke ground for a public safety building about a year ago. It should be done in about July of 2019, this year. And I want to talk a little bit about how we are going to pay for that building. So typically at the end of the fiscal year, most of your cities, most of your managers and most of your cities spend out every dime. If they have a couple $100,000 left over at the end of the year, they go spend it out because they're afraid the city's going to cut their budget by $200,000 more the next year because you didn't need it this year. The city of Cedar Falls, and when I first started here in the city 30 years ago, did operate that way. They stopped doing that and said, look, we're not going to cut you. We expect you, if you have extra money, turn it back. You don't have to dig into a budget very far to see that trend occurring. And so the city managers got together and said, we got to stop this trend. It's wasteful. And so now we are actually encouraged. We're not penalized. I wouldn't say we're rewarded, but we're certainly not penalized for turning that money back. So every year you may turn back $100, $200, maybe even $300,000 back to the city. And you have several city departments that turn back that money. It amounts to a significant amount over the years. So what the city has done for quite a number of years is they'll take those funds that we turn back, they'll put it in a capital account, and they'll save that money for when they need to do some bigger projects or for a rainy day fund or whatever the case may be. This public safety building is being paid that way, so there's no increase in taxes and there was no need for a bond referendum, which would have increased taxes. They were able to save money over the years to pay for this building, and that's happened for other larger projects as well in the city. So it really says a lot for the city and how funds are managed. I just want to show you, this is a compressed air foam, we call it the CAF system. This is a device that is in the back of some of the squad cars. And if you look at the red tank in the lower right-hand part of the squad car, it's filled with water and it has a foam component to it. Above it to the right, you'll see the fire hose. And just to the left of the fire hose, you'll see a smaller tank, and that's just an air compressed tank. The purpose of this is when your police officer, because they're out patrolling, they frequently arrive at fire scenes first. They can take this and spray to put out a exterior fire only. It could be a car fire, it could be a dumpster fire, it could be a deck fire, but they're not to enter a building with this because it'll run out of water after a certain period of time, and it's just not safe to do that. So, but it has some very neat suppression abilities. The foam component, what some of the fire guys will tell you is the foam component is equivalent to, if you got 30 gallons of water, it's equivalent to 10 times as much because of what that foam will do. So we actually got this idea from Charles City. We visited them a little bit because they cross-trained some of their police officers to be firefighters, and we visited them, and they had this, and it was very, very interesting. So we did a little more research, and we ended up adding this to 3 of our squad cars. And one thing that I was thinking about when I first saw this, I remember a police officer telling me about a deck fire. They arrived first at the scene, there's a deck on fire, it's starting to catch the side of the house. They're just imagining it going up into the soffit, which it ultimately did. And they were grabbing a garden hose. It was a summertime event. They grabbed a garden hose from a neighbor and tried to spray and do what they could to do what they could until the fire trucks got there. This is the type of tool that would work perfectly for that, and has. I want to tell you a story. It includes the firefighters, the public safety officers, and the use of this CAF system. A couple of years ago, we had a fire, and it was a mobile home fire. And we had 2 public safety officers in training that responded to that mobile home fire. They immediately identified that there was 3 people in that home, 2 kids on one end and a mother on another end, all in the bedrooms. The fire was right at the doorway, right off the deck going into the building. They had one of these units with them. They immediately sprayed it till the system ran out and knocked that fire down considerably in that doorway. The fire trucks arrived at that time. They immediately relayed the information of where those 3 individuals were in the house, the 2 kids and the mom. The firefighters were able to, they had their gear on, they put them on, they went in immediately and rescued those kids. But what the battalion chief said, the fire battalion chief in charge of that scene said that day, he said if it wasn't for the combination of public safety officers, this technology, this CAF system, and the firefighters arriving and being able to go into the building immediately without drawing a hose line and putting it out and taking it with them, the outcome of that call could have been significantly different. So one of the most important things I would like you to take out of this presentation is that it's a combination of teamwork. It's police officers and firefighters and technology and cross-training and everybody working together to save property and lives. And these are words from the battalion chief. If it wouldn't have been for the combination of things that we did on this call, the outcome could have been significantly different at this call. This is exactly what we want our public safety department doing, what the outcome for this call and the outcome of many, many calls that we've been on here recently. I do have a very short video here of that compressed air foam system being operated by one of our public safety officers. So you can see on the screen, we just put some pallets together, and we just did this just to show you how this system works. So you can see he's opening up this air tank to allow the air which causes the foam component to work. So they're turning it on, it's going into this tank, he's drawing this line now. There's 50 feet of line. And once he gets to the end of the line, there's also another valve that the hose actually pulls, and you can see it just charged that hose. Now he's able to spray that onto that fire or those pallets. And now if you look at it closely, you'll see that that foam component kind of sticks to those pallets, which helps kind of smother the flame. So it's a really neat tool that we've added a few years back that we hope is just one of many things that we can do to provide the best service we can, within the public safety department. So in closing, I guess what I would like to say is we're looking at a different model, and we have a different model. We still have a traditional, I'm going to call it traditional police response. We still have a traditional fire response, but we've got some cross training in which we can help each other out to be more effective. So we're putting more people on the scene, and we're being more effective at these fire scenes and at these police scenes, and that's ultimately what we're trying to accomplish. So we made some significant improvements, and we're going to continue to move forward and analyze everything that we do daily, so we can provide the best service for you. We can have the safest police service that we can, the safest fire service that we can provide for you. So I want to thank you for watching, and if any of you ever have any questions about the public safety model, what we're doing here, I encourage you just to give us a call at City Hall. Thanks again.